All right, so President Joe Biden did a sit down with the National Governors Association to basically discuss where they're at in terms of trying to handle COVID. And he said something in this discussion that they were having that I think is pretty much emblematic of all of the failures of the Joe Biden administration so far on COVID. Okay, obviously he has been nominally better than Donald Trump and, aggressively pushing for vaccines and stuff like that. But he has been completely inadequate. Okay, we've had more COVID deaths under Joe Biden than Donald Trump, and that's with a substantial portion of our population being vaccinated. So that is an absolute catastrophic failure, and there's a number of reasons for how that failure ended up happening. But I think that this clip that I'm about to show you, and specifically this quote that Tracking Biden from the Left is pointing out here, is going to reveal exactly what has gone wrong. But the quote here says, "Look, there is no federal solution. This gets solved at the state's level." So let's go ahead and hear what Joe Biden meant by there is no possible way that the federal government is going to be able to address substantially the COVID pandemic.
That as you look towards federal solutions that will help alleviate the challenge, make sure that we do not let federal solutions stand in the way of state solutions. And the production of 500 million rapid tests that will be distributed by the federal government is great, but obviously that dries up the supply chain for the solutions that we might offer as governor. And so just that brief comment before I turn it over to you, Mr. President, but I want to say personally, I've enjoyed working with you when I was in Congress as head of the DEA, and I appreciate your leadership. And thank you so much for giving us the time today to hear from us, but also so that we can hear from you personally about the challenge that we face. So, Mr. President, the microphone is yours. Thank you, President Biden.
They said, thank you very much, Ace. Look, there is no federal solution. This gets solved at a state level. I'm looking at Governor Sununu on the board here. He talks about that a lot. And it ultimately gets down to where the rubber meets the road, and that's where the patient is in need of help or preventing the need for help. Look.
Okay, so he does go on to talk about some of the things that his administration has done to assist some of the states throughout the pandemic. And, I don't want to take everything away from him, okay? They're not doing literally nothing, but what they are doing is completely inadequate. And I could give you one specific example that I covered on this channel recently, which was the rapid test that Joe Biden, Jen Psaki went out there. She was asked a question, why can't your administration just simply, ramp up production and then deliver at-home COVID tests to every single American, or make them available to every single American so that they can test at home without having to go wait in hours-long lines or without having to pay ridiculous price-gouged amounts at CVS or any other pharmacies in order to get these at-home tests. And she, at the time, literally laughed at that idea, okay, and brushed it off as if it was this ridiculous concept, even though, plenty of other countries around the world are doing that exact thing. And we also got this extra bit of information, which was that not only was Jen Psaki laughing at the idea of universal at-home COVID tests, but they actually had been briefed on a specific proposal relating to these at-home COVID tests that Joe Biden actually rejected months ago. Okay, so you see here from Vanity Fair, the Biden administration rejected an October proposal for free rapid tests for the holidays. With Omicron cases spreading like wildfire, the White House is finally taking steps to make free antigen tests available to all. But this fall, Vanity Fair has learned it dismissed a bold plan to ramp up rapid testing ahead of the holidays, and frustrated experts explain how confusion, distrust, and a single-minded fixation on vaccinating Americans left testing on the back burner for so long. So listen, if you follow my channel, you know I am 100% in favor of the vaccines. I think everybody should go get vaccinated, go get your booster, all of that. They're great, 100% on that issue. But that's irrelevant to the other methods that should be being deployed in order to tackle the pandemic, okay? I don't know if anybody noticed, but the United States has the single most amount of COVID deaths in the entire planet, okay? And that doesn't just go for total amounts, right? If you compare us to even larger countries like India or China, we also have more deaths than them. So even in a per capita sense, we are absolutely getting demolished by COVID. And there's a really good reason for that. And you could even draw a comparison between how the United States has handled this versus how a country like China has handled this, okay? You can argue, yeah, they've used more authoritarian methods to control the spread, but that also has to be balanced with the fact that we've had nearly 1 million Americans die, many of them, or a large majority majority of them, you could say, have died unnecessarily, because we could have gotten them vaccinated if we had had a better campaign to do so, or at the very least, we could have had ample tests available for everybody to use at home before Christmas, so that we would not be seeing the peak within Omicron that we are seeing right now. I mean, the fact that Joe Biden denied this request in October to have these tests ready to go, and then after the fact, we're not even going to get the 500 million tests that he was talking about in that clip that they've ordered now. We're not even going to start getting those until well into January, which is going to be after the main Omicron surge. So you've already missed the window. And how many people are, I mean, literally thousands, tens of thousands of Americans are dying right now. Okay, we have an average of, last time I checked yesterday, it was about 1,500 deaths per day. Okay, we're talking about, I love, everyone loves to use this standard, but we're talking about a 9/11 every 2 days, basically, worth of deaths. And a lot of those deaths could have been prevented if we had had universal at-home COVID tests. So this is just one example of the catastrophic failures of this Joe Biden administration, basically choosing to go with this austerity-minded neoliberal mindset, basically, instead of just doing the easier thing, the more efficient thing, and the better public health thing, which would have been doing a universal program that could have been available to all Americans. And that kind of brings me to my next major point, which is this entire idea that Joe Biden was trying to push in this clip, where he talks about there is no federal solution. What do you mean there's no federal solution? This is the same guy who, when he was running against Donald Trump, said when we were at like 220,000 total COVID deaths, he was literally running saying that any president who presided over that amount of deaths should resign. Okay, so when Donald Trump, and granted, Donald Trump was absolutely catastrophic in every way imaginable in handling the pandemic, but when Donald Trump has 220,000 deaths on his hands, and Joe Biden has significantly more than that on his hands in the year that he's been in office. So what exactly is the difference there? I mean, you say that Donald Trump needs to resign when he presides over hundreds of thousands of deaths, but then when you do that exact same thing, you turn around and say states' rights, you turn around and say, oh, it's up to the states, there is no federal response to this. What the fuck does that even mean? And this gets me to my main point here, which is, we can get into the specifics of all of the different minute areas where they went wrong, whether it's at-home COVID tests or any of the other number of things that they have not been doing that they could have been doing throughout this entire process, whether it's guaranteed paid leave that they failed to pass, or sick leave, or sending out more stimulus checks so that people could have afforded to stay at home during the lockdowns and everything that went on. From top to bottom, there have been plenty of catastrophic failures, but just in a generic sense, okay, for him to say that it's up to the states instead of the federal government, what he's ignoring there is that there is a key, very important distinction between what the federal government can do in terms of logistics and in terms of production and in terms of, most importantly, spending, that the federal government can do that states cannot do. So I talk about this concept on this channel a lot, and if you are somebody who knows anything about modern monetary theory, then you are probably aware of this. But the way that our financial system here works, basically, when you have a government, when you have a country that has a sovereign currency, okay, the U.S. federal government is the sole issuer of our currency, basically, of the U.S. dollar. So when you are budgeting for your household, in your family, right, you do have to have X amount of dollars in order to spend X amount of dollars, or else you're going to go into debt, and whether you like it or not, somebody's going to come knocking on the door and demanding you pay on those debts. Now, that applies to your household, that applies to local governments, and that applies to state governments. They have pretty much finite budgets, okay, that are determined largely by taxes and other things, etc. But the federal government, that does not apply to, okay? The federal government's spending, because they are, as the federal government, the sole issuer of the US dollar, they are not constrained by those same finite limits that states and local governments are constrained by. So when Joe Biden goes out there and he says, oh, I guess we can't do anything as the federal government, it's up to the states, what you're doing there is pushing austerity when you should be, as the federal government, using all the tools at your disposal, dumping as much money into the production of whether it's rapid tests or any number of other things. You should be dumping money into doing that so that the states don't have to finance it when they can't, okay? It's that simple. It's just completely delusional. The only actual restraints on federal spending that we have are not like, based on how much we tax, and there has to be a one-to-one correlation where you tax X amount of dollars and then you have to spend X amount of dollars and you can't possibly breach that. No, that's not how federal spending works. The only actual limit on what we can do as a federal government is based on inflation. And yes, inflation is doing pretty shitty right now in the United States. It's it's very high right now in the United States, and that's sector specific in different areas. And we can talk about the specifics within, whether it's the the gas industry basically, and OPEC and how they've been restricting the supply chains, or we can talk about multiple different sectors of the economy. But the reality is, none of the inflation that has been happening within the United States is due to too much spending on pandemic response. Okay, that's just not the reality in any way, shape, or form. The majority of inflation has been driven by supply chain issues. The fact that we've spent multiple decades exporting our jobs overseas so that we are reliant on foreign supply chains that have completely collapsed during the pandemic. It's also due to like corporate profiteering from billion-dollar corporations that are simultaneously seeing record profits while also jacking up their prices so that consumers are dumping more money into their pockets basically. So it's due to a lot of things, but inflation is not being caused by the federal government investing too much in pandemic preparedness or pandemic response. Okay, so this limit that he is setting for himself and his administration is part of the reason why we have ended up with nearly 1 million deaths, why he has ended up with more deaths under his watch than under Donald Trump's watch, even though Biden has had the advantage of having widespread access to vaccinations. So that's really the most condemnation that you could possibly level at Joe Biden himself, is that it's not that he's had more deaths under him because the vaccines don't work. No, the vaccines do work. Over 99% of people who are in the hospitals and people who are dying are unvaccinated. So if you just take this sole approach to this, where all you're talking about, as he did in that statement that he put out recently, where he said, if you're vaccinated, you're going to have a great winter. If you're unvaccinated, you're pretty much fucked and your family is going to die. That's basically the gist of what his statement was that came out a couple weeks ago. But if your only focus is on trying to get more people vaccinated, which is, a good thing in and of its own, but if that's your only focus, then you're missing out on all of these other logistical things that you need to be doing in order to prevent our hospital system from being overrun by unvaccinated people. And he is not willing to do that. He is literally, as you can see from that clip, deflecting all responsibility. Again, the same guy who said Donald Trump, the president of the United States, the overseer of the federal government, the same guy who said Donald Trump should resign when he hit 220,000 deaths, is now saying there is no federal response to this that could possibly work, as we are ratcheting up towards nearly 1 million COVID deaths.